Hi everyone, welcome to the Birthing at Home podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I've had 2 home births in April 2020 and recently in June 2023. I'm a mental health nurse and an ex-student midwife that still has a strong passion for birth and supporting women. This is the 4th episode for the Birthing at Home podcast. I'm so excited that it now has over 100 downloads because I was quite worried that no one would listen. So thank you. I hope you're enjoying the great birth at home stories that are being shared with us all. If you want to share your birth at home story, whether that's home birth or free birth, please send me a message on the podcast Instagram, which is birthingathome_a podcast. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. On today's episode, I chat with Michaela on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Michaela will be sharing her journey to free birthing her son Leo with the support of a doula and her partner. Welcome, Michaela. Welcome to the Birthing at Home podcast. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday morning.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about who you are, who's in your family kind of thing?
So my name is Michaela. I am 26 years old. I have a business, my own home business, which I started when my daughter was 9 months old, which was during COVID time and everything, how we were locked indoors. We couldn't go to work or anything like that. We need a little bit of extra income, so I started my own handmade business making cloth nappies and clothing.
Awesome.
Yeah. So my daughter now is 4.5 years old.
Yeah. And
I've
that's
also
Willow.
That's Willow, yep.
Yeah.
I've also got my son, Leonardo, who is almost 11 months old.
Yeah.
And then my husband, who's 29 this year.
Yeah, cool. What's his name?
Patrick.
Nice. Cool. And you live on the Gold Coast?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Cool. So I believe you had Leo at home, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I had planned to have him at home from the start.
Yeah.
I really wanted a home birth with my first, but my husband was very, very nervous, and because there was so many unknowns and he wasn't sure what was going to happen, he just felt more comfortable in the hospital setting.
Yeah.
So we had my daughter at the hospital.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad experience, but it wasn't the best either. Yeah. And like when a couple of years down the track, when you think back on it, like in the moment, it felt okay. Like it was good. Nothing went wrong. It was like textbook kind of thing. It went really long. It was 43 hours from start of labor until she came out.
Yeah.
But then, things happened where I look back on it and I'm like, I wasn't really okay with that.
Yeah.
So for instance, I really wanted a water birth, and due to the hospital requirements, because there was meconium in the waters, I wasn't allowed to get in the pool.
Wow.
And then I couldn't even use the shower because the monitors they had on me couldn't get wet. Then they offered to put a screw into her head, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. That sounded horrible. Yeah. So basically, I just labored standing up the whole time with like no type of pain management whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, but yeah, other than that. Yeah.
So with Willow, did you go into labour spontaneously, or were you induced? Yeah.
No, I went into labour spontaneously. I was very adamant that I wanted to avoid the any induction as much as possible. At the time we were living with my mother-in-law, and that was very hard because she's quite she grew up medically in the medical system. And so she was like every day after 38 weeks, she was like, have you booked an induction? Have you booked an induction? Oh yeah, it was terrible.
What?
And unfortunately, I had this idea, or the idea was put on my head that labor would happen between 38 and 40 weeks.
Yeah.
Back then, I didn't know that, a lot of births, especially first births, happen almost at 42 weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very happy that I went into labor spontaneously with her.
Yeah.
But,
how many weeks were you?
I was 41 plus 5 with her.
Oh yeah. That's the same as I was with my first son as well.
Yeah, and apparently it's like the most common time to go into labor with your first is 41 plus 5.
Yeah,
and I only found that out like years afterwards.
Yeah. There you go. So you went into labor, you're at home, and then you drove into the hospital or whatever, and then had her in hospital?
Yeah, well, we went to the hospital a few times. We were only at that time, we were only 7 minutes from the hospital.
Yeah.
So I think it was around 36 hours. I was like, all right, I feel like things have ramped up enough. Let's go to the hospital. So we went, and they did the whole check how far along I am to see the dilation, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you haven't dilated at all, but it's really thin," and that broke me because I felt like I was doing so well. I was managing the contractions really well. I felt like I had put a lot of work into it, especially 36 hours down the road, and they were regular the whole time. It's not like they were sporadic all over the place, and they were intense too. So yeah, at that point I kind of felt like I'd failed in some way because they've checked and nothing has happened. So after that, they sent me home because they had the rule you don't stay until you're about 6 centimeters.
Oh my gosh.
So they sent me home, and I labored for longer and longer. And then I think it was around maybe only an hour after that I said we have to go back because it felt like it ramped up again.
Yeah.
So we went back, and I had dilated to 3 centimeters, and they offered to break my waters. And because I hadn't had any sleep, because the contractions were intense enough that I couldn't fall asleep, I had been awake for so long, I just kind of wanted to get it over and done with. So I accepted the manual break of my waters.
Yeah.
To which then they discovered the meconimum, which means I couldn't get into the pool, and then it just kind of went from there. But after the waters were broken, it things really, really ramped up. And as a first time mum, you don't really know what level it's going to get to. So each stage you're like, oh yeah, this is definitely the top. This is definitely the top, and then it gets worse, and you're like, oh my gosh. So it ramped up a bit more, and I was then so sleep deprived that my body just had micro naps in between contractions. I didn't notice anyone else. Apparently there was maybe 10 people coming in and out of the room the whole time, but I didn't notice any of that. And then I was able to get out after a contraction. I said, I think I feel the head. And the midwife at the time, he was like, oh, I don't think you're quite there yet. But he was like, I'll check next contraction. So he got a mirror and had a look. And then, next contraction, he was like, oh, yep, that's a head. And then they were like, all right, let's get you on the bed. And I was thinking the bed, but I couldn't express what I wanted. And because I didn't want to birth on my back, I didn't want to do that, but they were basically forcing me onto the bed. To birth her. So I got onto the bed, and she came out 5 minutes later, and I had a 2nd degree tear with her, and I requested that we did delayed cord clamping. So I said for at least an hour. And then have the interrupted golden hour with her and everything like that, skin to skin. And they were very respectful of that. So while I was having the skin to skin, they stitched me up, and then an hour came on the dot, and the placenta still hadn't come out.
Yeah.
And they made me think that that was a bad thing. Like it should have come out at 15 minutes and everything. So they were pushing the oxytocin shot to get it out.
Yeah.
And so, they were like, all right, we got to get this out. We don't want you to bleed out or anything like that. And I'm like, in that moment, because I did a lot of research before her, but apparently not enough.
Yeah.
Because it didn't occur to me that the placenta might not come out by itself.
Yeah.
So I accepted the shot, which I still regret to this day.
Yeah.
I wish I'd tried other things, because I didn't even, try breastfeeding to stimulate it. I didn't even try and walk around to stimulate it. I was still stuck on the bed.
Yeah.
So they gave me the shot and it came out and that was all fine. And then, it was smooth sailing from then. We had a really great breastfeeding journey. I breastfed her all the way until she was 3.5 years old.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
That was through my whole second pregnancy.
Wow.
And then I tandem fed both my children for about a week before she self-weaned.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. 3.5 years. Wow.
Yeah. She loved it. It was great. And it's so good when they get sick and you can just pop the boob in, or if, they get hurt, pop the boob in. It's really easy and really nice and a great way to get her to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, how did you, I guess, reflecting on that experience with Willow and then the model of care or the way that you chose to bring Leo into the world, like how did reflecting on Willow's birth impact that?
Well, I definitely did more research into the placentas.
Yeah.
And I joined a few home birth groups and I read a lot of birth stories. And because, when you Google things, a lot of the top results are always the fear-mongering ones.
Yeah.
I went. Yeah, the news articles and everything like that. Yeah. And you can't really get a good idea of, what the body's capable of. So reading all these birth stories of women who just trusted their body and went with the process, and the time frame that I was seeing was between 1 and 4 hours before the placenta came out. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't even get a chance to do that. Like all these years after I felt that my body kind of failed in that respect, that, it didn't come out by itself. But now reading all of those stories, I realized I didn't even get a chance to try. Yeah. I was pretty determined this time around to trust the process and go with it. And because it was such even though it went for a long time, it was uneventful, a pretty straightforward birth with Willow. This time around, I approached my husband. I was like, I think we can do a home birth this time. Yeah. And he was still quite nervous about it, but he trusted me. Yeah. And he's a very logical person. So that I could help him, so that he would know what to do in each situation if anything came up. We went through possible scenarios, if this happened, what would we do? What would happen? Because he was going to be my support. He was my voice. He knew what to do in each scenario. So every time we went through something, he felt a bit more confident. Yeah.
How did you first hear about like the possibility, I guess, the idea of birthing at home? Like, did you know about that before Willow, or is that something you only learned after having Willow?
Oh, I feel like I've known it my whole life. Like
cool.
It felt like a normal thing to me, even though my mum, she had 4 children. They were all birthed at the hospital. Yeah. But a home birth was, we must have talked about home birth while I was growing up because it seemed like a normal thing for me. Yeah. Like a thing that just happens, Yeah. Even like accidental home births.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how did women do it hundreds of years ago? Everything like that. Yeah,
pretty much all. I think that, like, I wish that I could tell everybody that, 300 or so years ago, everyone was birthing at home.
Yeah.
And like humans have been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but it's only in the past, 200-300 years since, obstetrics have like really taken over the birth space, and like we've got all these fancy new technologies and ways to manage a woman's body.
Yeah.
We're having to go into hospital. I forget who it was, but on one of the other episodes, they were saying that, you go to hospital when you're sick.
Yes.
That's the only time you ever, like when something's wrong, like you've got low blood pressure, low iron, you've got a sickness, but then you also can just go when you're having a normal, uncomplicated pregnancy to have an uncomplicated physiological process that's it doesn't line up to me.
No, that's right.
But yeah. Okay, cool. That's awesome. And did Patrick have any idea about home births or,
No, he, it was definitely a new concept to him. Especially because, like I said before, his family quite medical based. They grew up, every time something happened here, have this drug, this drug will help. Like they're pretty knowledgeable about it, but I think a little bit overdone. Yeah. I was kind of raised the complete opposite. Any ailment, any problem, there was a natural solution. Yeah. So, if I had a sore stomach, my mum would give me some bicarb in a glass of water. Yeah. And that would either settle it or it would bring whatever up, up whatever was the problem. And then I'd feel great afterwards. Yeah. Whereas Pat's mum, they'd have some sort of drug to settle the stomach or anything like that. Yeah. So, we're just complete opposite ends. So, over our relationship, because we've been together for 9 years now, over our relationship, we've been basically teaching each other, what we know, and depending on the situation, 99% of the time we will use the natural route because it just works better. Yeah. And then as an absolute last resort, turn to the medical side. Yeah. Because, it has its time and place, but I do feel it is overused a lot. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, okay. So through the pregnancy, he was still nervous, like right up to the end. And it didn't help that his mum was in his ear every other weekend, saying, I think this is a bad idea. I'll pay for your midwife, everything like that. Because we didn't get a midwife because in Queensland, I'm not sure about the other states, but in Queensland, it's upwards of like $5,000, $6,000 for a private midwife. Yeah. Which obviously was out of our budget a lot. Yeah. So we decided mostly I did this for my husband so that he had someone to support him, is that we got a doula. Yeah. And she was lovely. I didn't really see her too many times leading up to the birth, but we did talk a lot. Yeah. And really I had her there so that he would feel a little bit more confident. Like if there was something that he couldn't recognize, she would. Yep. But Pat's mum kept saying, I'll pay for your midwife and blah, blah, blah. She was really putting a lot of fear into Pat, and that really frustrated me. And really annoyed me. And what annoyed me the most was that she was talking to him about it instead of me. And this was my birth, but she was talking to him through him to relay messages. Yeah. It was really frustrating at that point. Yeah, it's like totally, like I think at times like that comes from a place of love and care, but also it does. When you love and care for someone, you also want to trust them, I guess. And I think just like in general, there's just such a distrust in women's bodies. And especially if people have come from that medical mindset that, that you need the medicines to make you better. And I think we've really lost touch of, those the natural remedies, I guess, like the bicarb. Like I certainly have never
done that. You know, I would also have been offered a particular medication or something.
Yeah.
And I feel that this journey to birthing at home, it really gets you in touch with who you are as a human, not just, you know, as a number just walking around. Like,
yes,
like it connects you with your body. Like, and why wouldn't you want to be connected to your body?
Yeah.
But yeah, wow. Okay, so going back a little bit, so you found out you were pregnant and you decided that you would like to birth at home, but affording a private midwife, like I'm pretty sure is in every state, is extremely expensive. So you decided to go, I guess in many ways it's more similar to a free birth. Would you say that?
Yes, I'd say it was more towards a free birth, not quite a wild birth.
Yeah.
I did still get one scan. At 20 weeks, very quick, was just to check the location of the placenta for my husband's peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because his mum had mentioned, you know, if the placenta is covering the cervix and the baby can't come out, everything like that.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So to ease his mind, we went and did a scan, and they said, yep, everything looks great, blah, blah, blah. So then, you know, that's it. We left. That was all the intervention I got in that regards.
So you found out you were pregnant at home and then just accepted, cool, we're pregnant.
Basically. And then I went about my day.
Wow, that is so cool. And like, yeah, wow. So as you were getting, I guess, more noticeably pregnant and stuff, did people start asking like, where are you birthing? Who are you birthing with? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. We definitely chose to keep that information a bit more private. So we weren't just telling anyone, because we wanted to reduce the amount of fear that people might put onto us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, there is a lot of misconception around it. And you know, sometimes it comes from people who haven't even had kids yet. They don't know what it's like, or it's coming from people who have birthed in a hospital. They've had complications. It's resulted in an emergency C-section or anything like that. So, you know, they reflect on their experience, and, you know, obviously it comes from a good place, but it's not what we needed. So, we kept who we told to a minimum, but even that minimum was not small enough. I did joke to Pat at the beginning that we just don't tell anyone what we're doing at all. But it eventually got found out, because I wasn't going to any of the hospital appointments. And, you know, every time one of the family members would chime in and be like, oh, yeah, you know, how did this appointment go? I was like, oh, yeah. Well, we didn't do that.
Yeah. Did you, like, obviously in a midwifery sort of model, they, you know, check your fundal height, or they, you know, do palpation, like to try and find where baby is, etc. Did you do any kind of checks yourself?
No, not until the very end, only because I was curious. I had a look at baby mapping to try and figure out where the head was, where the legs, just for my own curiosity. Because, you know, babies can turn in the last 15 minutes kind of thing, so it wasn't really a concern of mine. And if the baby was going to be breech, then I had prepared myself for that as well.
That's amazing.
And it was a bit difficult to figure out what was the bum and what was the head. But I also did some spinning baby techniques, only because I was getting like some trapped gas in the last couple of weeks, just because the room was running out, or it felt like it. And that really helped to relieve it, because there's this one movement where you you kneel on like the edge of a couch or at the edge of a chair, and then inversion. Yeah, the inversion.
Yeah.
And then it just lifts the baby off of all of your organs, and gives it a chance to just reset. And it was just such a good feeling in those last few weeks.
Yeah. You're the fourth person that I've had on the podcast so far, and every single person has mentioned the forward-leaning inversion.
Oh, it is so good. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's great. And did you have, I guess, throughout the pregnancy, trying to avoid these fear-based anxieties from other people, did you have any concerns? Like, did it ever occur to you about, any risks that could happen, or you were pretty much like, oh, that could happen, so this is how we're going to deal with it?
Yeah, I'm quite a positive thinker. I believe that the subconscious is very powerful, and so what you believe is what will happen. Yeah. So I make sure, like, in those situations, yes, I will, acknowledge that is a possibility, but it's not something I envision happening. So yeah, I did have a look, in case this happened, this is what we're going to do. If, like I said to my husband, if the cord prolapses, like if it falls out before the baby, then this is the movement I have to do. This is what you do. You call an ambulance, blah, 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 and we go from there. And then that's where we left it. Like, that was that ticked off the list. That's what happens if we do that. And then we went through the other ones. But me, while I was envisioning my birth, I was envisioning everything going perfectly. I was trusting my body knew what to do. So me personally, I had no fears through the whole pregnancy. The only thing that worried me was my husband, because, he was still quite nervous about it all.
Yeah. With Willow or Leo, did you do any childbirth education kind of stuff?
I did it with Willow. I did a hypnobirthing course. And that was really good information.
Did your husband, did Pat also do it?
Yeah, he did it with me. So just those light massage techniques and the breathing techniques they were amazing. Something I also highly recommend, because they let you know through each stage the best way to breathe through it. And sometimes you might want to change it up, but a lot of the time it's what you need. So I use that through Willow's long labor. And for my second pregnancy, I still remembered the basics of it, and didn't feel like I needed to refresh or anything. So, when I went into labor with Leo, it kind of, it all kind of came back to me, and I just went into my own space, and it just came naturally. I didn't even have to think about the type of breathing I had to do. That's
amazing. That's so, I find this story so cool, because like a hospital birth and a birth without and a midwife, for example, they're so different. And I find that really empowering, that you went through this transformation, that you just had such immense trust in yourself and your body, and were just like, well, of course I can do it. That's just very cool. Apart from hypnobirthing and with Willow and whatnot, like, where do you think you, like, was it just from reading and listening to birth stories, or how did you find this sort of sense of empowerment?
It was definitely reading the birth stories. That was, I loved it. I loved going through all of the posts and reading everyone's birth story, and feeling it, because, that emotion comes through. You can feel how they were feeling, and it just excited me further for my turn, for my turn to experience that, to experience what they were experiencing for those home births.
That's amazing. Cool. So you went through your pregnancy, acknowledging any possible things that might happen, helping out Pat to kind of come to terms with everything. At what point did you decide that you would hire a doula?
Oh, right at the beginning. So as soon as I knew I was pregnant, I was having a look at around at recommendations, and then we had a few like introductory meetings with about 3 different doulas, and I picked the one that I felt I connected with the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And did Pat have the opportunity to ask any questions or things like that to try and ease his fears?
Yeah. So with each appointment, well, I say appointment, with each coffee meeting we had.
Yeah.
Before then, we went through, and I said to Pat, all right, let's write down all of the questions so that we can bring them up and, tick those off the list, get an answer for each one.
Yeah.
And so, I leading up to the birth, I saw my doula probably only 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Only because, it was just let's catch up, see where we're at and everything like that. I didn't feel
it's just rapport building, making sure you're comfortable.
Yes, and it was more just to get to know each other more, because she was going to be in my birth space, and I wanted to feel more of a connection with her.
Yeah.
So every meetup we did, there wasn't any listening to any heartbeats or checking the size or anything like that. Nothing of that. It was just a conversation, and we were talking about our days, our weeks, how we were going, everything like that.
Yeah.
And that was that.
Amazing. Cool. So when did it all happen then?
So it was on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I woke up and I was a bit annoyed that I still wasn't in labor, because you try and prepare for everything.
Yeah.
But I kind of had this idea that the second would come earlier than the first.
Yeah, I was sold that idea as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it got to the same gestation as Willow, I was like, all right, he's not here yet. Okay, now what? I was getting a little bit bored because I had completed all my tasks, finished all I wanted to get finished before the baby came. Yeah. And and then
41 plus 5, yeah?
Well, it was actually 41 plus 2, because with Willow, we went off of the scan date for her gestation, which was coming up a week later or a week earlier, I can't remember, than if I calculated it from ovulation. Yeah. So turns out, so Willow, I thought, came at 41 plus 2, but she actually came 41 plus 5. Yeah. So when it got to 41 plus 2 with Leo, I was like, all right, hasn't happened yet.
Come on, baby, where are you?
Okay, well, let's do a bit more organizing, Anyway,
what
and then it got, and then 41 plus 5 came, and I woke up that morning, and I was kind of expecting to go into labor overnight, because that's what happened with Willow. Labor started at about 1 a.m. Yeah. And so every morning I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh, no baby yet.
Still pregnant.
So we got up, and Pat decided that day that he was just going to start his leave. Because he was getting quite anxious about not having his phone on him and not getting a call that I was in labor. Yeah. And we decided it was close enough to just start his leave. And so he decided to stay home that day. So we decided to go out to the shops to get some food and everything like that. And as we got into the car, I felt like the tiniest little cramp. Okay. And I was like, oh my God, was that my imagination? Yeah. And I didn't say anything. I was like, no, I don't want to give anyone false hope. So I just kept it to myself. Yeah. And then we got to the shops and started walking around, and, within maybe an hour of it starting, I had to stop walking at each contraction. So there were definitely contractions. Yeah. I had to stop walking and wait until it was over and then keep going. Yeah. And so we didn't even get any food. We got there and we got my daughter a smoothie, and Pat was like, so should we go home or can we go to Kmart and do some browsing and everything like that?
Yeah.
And I think probably the hardest decision through my whole pregnancy was that moment, deciding whether we should just stay and keep browsing or if we should go home and set up the birth pool.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
And I was like, you know what, let's just go home. So we went home and Pat started blowing up the birth pool and filling that up, and my daughter was helping him and she was super excited.
Yeah.
Because actually the whole pregnancy we were trying to figure out what would happen with Willow. Like, would we drop her off somewhere? And probably until like 30 weeks, the plan was to drop her off at Pat's brother's place.
Yeah.
While everything happened. But then I started watching some birth videos, and I started seeing, siblings there watching and, just being there and experiencing it. And I was like, why don't we give Willow that opportunity? Yeah. And so we decided just to keep her home,
Yeah. So she would have been around 3.5 at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, 3.5 years old.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, Willow and Pat, they were filling up the birth pool, and I had my playlist going. So one thing I didn't do with Willow is I didn't have a dedicated music playlist. Yeah. And so and I only got around to it with my second pregnancy in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. Because I wasn't really drawn to it. When you have the motivation to do something, well, the motivation wasn't there. So I didn't push it. I didn't try and force it. Yeah. And then one day I was like, I feel like doing the music. And so, I sat down with just like some small things that don't take any brain power to do. Yeah. And I was sitting on the floor, doing that, listening to the music, just going through all my other playlists. And I was like, oh, yes, I like that one. So I added it to my birth playlist. Yeah. And then after I'd gone through my music, I went through some previous posts in the home birth groups of other women sharing their playlists. Yeah. And I went through their playlists and I picked the ones that I liked.
Yeah, that's excellent.
So, I had that and I started the music. And what I really liked about my playlist was that at the start of it, it was quite upbeat and music that you really want to dance to. Yep. So I found myself dancing through the contractions, and it was amazing. Just like the way that your body moves with the music helped move the baby, helped with the contractions, and it just felt like the right thing to do. Yeah. So I was dancing along through my labor to the music. Pat was filling up the birth pool. I had messaged my doula earlier, letting her know that the contractions had started. Yeah. And she was like, "Oh, I'm about to get on a boat to do some whale watching." Oh. And I was like, "Oh, that's fine." I was like, "How long is it going to take?" She's like, "Oh, probably like 1 or 2 hours." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine. Get on the boat, do your whale watching. It's just the start." And everything like that. So,
that's so funny.
So she went whale watching, and my husband joked later on. He was like, "You're the whale she should be watching." And so that was a good laugh. And and then through while Pat was filling up the pool, Willow would come over and she would ask me questions, and I was able to talk to her through the contractions, and she knew that when I had a contraction, she needed to stop and wait. Yeah. And she was really good at that. Yeah. And then so then I had bought myself a birth comb.
Oh yeah.
Just for the pressure points on the hand, because I didn't have that for my first either. Yeah. But my doula had given me banksia pods. They're like these seed pods with and all around them they've got little like mini clamshells all around them. Okay. That are like rounded then, and you hold them in your hand and they literally hit every point of your hand.
Oh, wow.
When you squeeze them.
Yeah.
And while I was in labor, I tried the birth comb, but it was actually a little frustrating because I kept having to move it and it wasn't hitting the right points. So I then tried the banksia pods and I was able to squeeze them. I didn't have to maneuver them. I didn't have to think about it. I could just squeeze them and they hit every point, and it was so good, such a good feeling during the contractions to use them.
Yeah.
So they were amazing.
Do you think that it reduced like the intensity of the contraction, or do you think that it just redirected your attention?
It definitely redirected me to my hands, and instead of the contractions. So they were amazing because you instinctively you want to squeeze something. Squeezing these pods was such a good feeling, like a big relief. I also had a TENS machine. But by the time I was putting it on, the doula had arrived at that point. She was having a look at the intensity that I was having them at, and she was like, "Oh, do you think you want to get into the pool?" She was like, "At that intensity, you might want to get some relief from the pool." And I was like, I said, "Oh, I don't want to get in too early because you hear so many stories that it
slows things down.
It can slow down labor." She said that she doesn't believe that's actually a thing. She said if the baby is ready to come, no water is going to stop it. And I was like, oh, okay, because I was so excited because I didn't get that chance with Willow. So so we took the TENS machine off after like 5 minutes, and I started walking over to the pool, which was only like 2 meters from me. And after a meter, I had to stop again because there was another contraction. And then got into the pool with the help of both my doula and my husband. And when you submerge in that water and it just lifts the weight, and you've just got such free movement, it was such an amazing feeling to get in that pool. I wish I'd gotten in a bit earlier. And anyway, so at that point, I thought like the intensity level I would have said was probably a 5 out of 10 compared to Willow. She was definitely a 10 out of 10 for intensity. But this time around, it was probably 5 out of 10. So I was expecting, quite a bit more time, like a few more, like a lot of hours, maybe like 10 hours before anything was happening. At this point, it had been 5 hours and 45 minutes.
Since that first
since the first contraction.
Wow.
Or the first niggly feeling.
And your waters haven't broken?
No, waters hadn't broken yet.
Cool.
So I got into the pool and it was just a relief. And then I had this break, like, because the contractions were coming quite regularly. But then after I got into the pool, I had this break from the contractions for a good 5 minutes. And, past me would have been like disappointed in that because I didn't want it to slow down or stop. But in that moment, it was so good to just have a breath and, have a look around at everything, talk to my daughter, talk to my husband, give him a hug, everything like that. And then there's a mother of all contractions happened. It felt very, very different. And I felt that, urge to really bear down with it. And so I did. I surrendered to my body. And I just let it do its thing. And then I felt this pop in the water. And I was like, oh my God, I was shocked. I said, I think that was the waters. And my doula was like, yeah, I saw a few bubbles. I think it was. And in that moment, I just felt like I had achieved something great because, I wasn't able to break, the waters didn't break by itself with Willow. So having them break by themselves was just that first achievement for me. And it was just that oxytocin hit where I was just so happy that had happened. And then it can feel like, especially when you're not having any checks of any kind,
it can feel like you're doing, like you can have trust that your body's doing its thing, but you don't really have anything to measure. Like, I guess the contractions can get stronger or longer or more intense. But for me, for example, my contractions were always very irregular. Like they were always very intense, but I'm not really sure I could measure, like, compare the intensity. But yeah, that I also, with my recent home birth, also kind of was like, where am I in this? And yeah, I can imagine that the waters breaking would be like, oh, my body is like, we're doing this. We are doing this.
It's doing it by itself, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I was just so excited by that. And then after that, there was another strong contraction, and again, I bared down because I probably sounded like a cow at that point because I wasn't making any noise. Like I didn't feel like I needed to make any noise up until that point. And then I just felt like my body needed to roar. Yeah. But it kind of came out more like a cow sound.
Okay.
And yeah, I bared down, and then I felt that, you know, that same feeling I'd felt with Willow, and I was like, I think that's the head. Like, I think it's there. Yeah. And yeah, I reached down and he was crowning, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But I was saying this, but it wasn't coming out of my mouth. So I was only thinking it. So no one knew that the baby was there. Yeah. And then, next contraction. So I, at that point, I wasn't pushing. Yep. I was just surrendering to the contractions, just letting them do their thing. Yeah. So I could feel his head go down and then go a little bit back up and then down, a little bit back up. And I was like, this is good. This is fantastic, because this is stretching everything slowly, making room for him to come out and everything. Because with Willow, the midwives were telling me I needed to push. And I was like, but I don't have the feeling. I don't have the contraction. And I'm pretty sure that's the reason I teared with her. Also, birthing on my back, I think, contributed. So yeah, with Leo, I was just waiting for the contraction to happen. And then his head popped out. Like I didn't actually feel the ring of fire either.
Oh my gosh.
So his head popped out, and then after that, you get that little bit of relief. I was able to let everyone know, my husband and the doula, that his head was out. And
and so you're in the water. You're like in the water right now.
Yeah, still in the pool. Yeah. So at this point I had dropped the banksia pods on the floor. Yeah. And reached down to feel his head, and that's also another magical moment. Yes. And then I could feel him wiggling around, moving his body around, positioning his shoulders better. And, it all felt right. It all felt like this was meant to happen. Yeah. And then, the next contraction came and his body just slipped out really easily. Yeah. And I think I was a little too excited in that moment, because I brought him up, not fast, but I brought him up probably quicker than I'd imagined. Yep. Like I imagined just a slow bring up, but I brought him up a little bit quicker than I thought. And I put him on my chest, and I was just so happy that I'd done it. And I had him in my arms, and I was just looking at him and how perfect he was. And and because I'd felt him moving, between his head coming out and his body, I knew that he was good. I knew that he was fine. Yeah. But I hadn't voiced that to my husband. So he was looking at this baby who hadn't made a noise yet, who hadn't taken a breath. Yeah. And he was quite worried. But I didn't see that. I didn't anything until I watched the birth video back afterwards. I was looking at Pat and I was like, oh my gosh, you were quite worried. Yeah. But I didn't feel any of that. And it didn't feel like it went a long time either, because I think it was about a minute before he took his breath. Yeah. But at that moment, I was just holding him in my arms. I was just looking at him, looking at all of his fingers, all of his toes. Yeah. then he took his breath and he let out this probably like one cry, and then he stopped and he opened his eyes and he looked around.
Oh,
and that was that. And
oh my goodness.
And I looked at Willow and I said, we did it, you know, he's here. And the most beautiful thing happened, as Willow was standing next to Pat, and she looked at him and she said, Dad, I want a baby.
Oh.
And I was like, oh gosh, that's just the most beautiful thing that we could have done for her, was to let her experience birth and how beautiful it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That like almost brings tears to my eyes. Like, that is so beautiful. That's like, oh my gosh. Wow. So, oh my gosh, that is so cool. I think it like that really touches me this way, because like so much of what you're saying about, you know, like the head moving and everything in the pool, like that happened for me as well. And like, I obviously had, you know, a couple more people around me, but like I just, I remember being like, whoa, it's happening. Like, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. And then when, I also have a video I'm really keen to share, but like, like grabbing him through the water and then bringing him up. And in the video, I'm just saying, I did it. I did it.
Yep. That's right.
Just, oh like, gosh, like such like the most empowering feeling ever.
It really is. And I just felt this great sense of accomplishment at that moment.
Yeah.
I stayed in the pool for about probably an hour, just staring at him. It felt like 5 minutes, but it was about an hour. And then we were like, okay, you know, pool's getting a little bit cold, so we decided to get out.
Yeah.
And waddled over to the couch, and I sat down, and then we started. He, you know, did the whole newborn crawl on my chest over to my breast, and he started feeding, and then at that point I felt the contractions start up again for the placenta, and I was and this was that last puzzle piece, that last piece that I was trusting my body could do, and I had allowed, you know, I was prepared to wait like a whole day for it to come out, you know. I was fine with it. If it needed to stay in that long, then that was fine. But it was only a little bit past an hour. The contractions started up again. I squatted over a bowl, gave a little push, and it just plopped straight out. Yeah, amazing. And I was on cloud 9. Yeah, you know, all these things that I felt I didn't get a chance to do the first time. Yeah, I had trusted my body, and it just did it by itself. You know. Yeah. And you know, this home birth was kind of that healing birth that I didn't know I needed. Yeah. Because you convince yourself that it was okay. Yeah. But then you experience it so much better, and you're like, you wish everyone could experience birth that way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's how I actually have been talking about my recent home birth. That I've had 2 home births, and I think, like, obviously in home birth you have a lot more power, and you know, it's your space, so what you say goes. But in my first birth, it also went pretty well, but it was the placenta that I got caught up about, and I also had to have the injection. And in like after Frankie was born, I was like, wow, I didn't actually realize that I was so hung up about having the injection, you know? Yeah. But like being able to have that completely 100% physiological labor, birth of placenta, like that is so empowering in itself. Like that your body did it from everything, all of it. It did it all by itself. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And did you have any tears?
No tears, not even a graze.
Amazing. That's so cool. And what was Willow doing? How did Willow take it?
Oh my gosh, she's such a sweet girl. I was sitting on the couch and I was just feeding Leo and just gawking over him and she came over with because she's got a little tablet where she's got a few learning apps on, but she also knows how to use the camera function.
Oh.
So she came over with her tablet and she was taking photos of us.
Oh my gosh.
I was just so thankful, so appreciative of her, and she couldn't stop looking at him, and you could see that it was like love at first sight.
Yeah. Wow.
And then the next day we put the feeding pillow around her and laid him on it, and she had the biggest smile. She would, you knew in that moment that they were just connected.
Yeah.
And to this day they still love each other. Every time Leo sees her, I'm pretty sure Leo started smiling at her before he was smiling at me. Yeah. So, it was just such a beautiful feeling to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so special. And so how long did the doula stick around for?
She stuck around until after the placenta came out, and she checked it over and everything was intact.
Yeah.
And then she bagged it up and labeled it and put it in our freezer so that we could do something with it later.
Yeah.
And it's still in our freezer.
Yeah.
We are waiting because we're currently in a rental, so we're waiting until we are moved into our own home before we decide that we plant it. So until then, it's just living in there. But But she the doula gave me a few tinctures, so some afterbirth pain tinctures, because I didn't actually feel any afterbirth pains with Willow. But with Leo, they were intense afterwards, especially while breastfeeding. Yeah. So that was a new experience. So those tinctures were definitely a godsend. Yeah. And she also had made up a little chai for me, and a few pieces of dark chocolate, and had some coconut water as well. So, wow. She'd also made for me. It was like an apple crumble, just some things in the fridge. She cleaned up the kitchen. She helped empty the birth pool, and then we weighed him. Yeah. And he was exactly 4 kilos. Wow. So, when Willow was born, she was 3.7 kilos. Yeah. And, Leo was 4 kilos.
Oh, wow. That is so cool.
Yeah. And then, that's all we needed from her. So she left. Yep. And then, we continued our day because he was born at 2 p.m. Yeah. So we just, we just went on with our day. Yeah. We went to bed as usual. With my first, I had this idea that I'm pretty sure a lot of first-time parents have, that their children are just going to sleep in a cot, on the other side of the room. But that didn't happen. So I decided to co-sleep with Willow. Yeah. From about 2 days old. Yeah. And it was probably the best decision I ever made. Yeah. I learned how to sleep safely with her. So we got one of the sides off of the bassinet. We put it up against our bed. So she had her own space, but she was right next to me. Yeah. So when she needed a feed, I'd just sit up and I'd feed her. Yeah. At around 9 months old with her, I was a bit of a zombie because she was feeding every half an hour through the night. Yeah. So I did some research and discovered a technique to feed lying down. Oh, yeah. And, oh, my gosh, I'd wish I'd done that from the start. It saved me. I was able to basically sleep through her feeding, just leaving my boob out and she could help herself.
Yeah, I've seen videos of that. Yeah.
So this time around with Leo, I just, from the beginning just started co-sleeping with him, feeding him lying down. And you know what? I didn't experience the newborn fatigue with him. I didn't get that sleep deprivation because, I was able to sleep through his feeds. I didn't even have to nap with him during the day. Like I felt like I had energy. I felt really good.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, you know, still co-sleeping now. We actually all still sleep in the same bedroom. Our bed is like 4 or 5 meters long to accommodate all of us.
Amazing.
But yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah. I do have one last question. So you have Leo. When are you telling everybody that Leo has been born? How did everybody else take that whole delivery of information?
So through the labor, because I didn't want to tell anyone I was in labor.
Yeah.
Because I didn't, you know, want anyone putting their last minute fears on us or anything like that.
Yeah.
But we did keep Pat's mum in the loop. Just in case we needed someone to pick up Willow, just in case she didn't handle it well or anything like that.
Yeah.
So he was keeping her in the loop, and then I think it was the next day that we messaged the immediate family, just over Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And just let them know that Leo was born safely at home.
Yeah.
And he was doing well and everything like that, and I was doing well.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, we got all the congratulations, and then one comment came in from one of the siblings, which you could read between the lines, was more of a, you know, oh, we're glad that nothing went wrong. Like,
oh my gosh.
Thanks.
Oh my gosh. People would never say that to somebody birthing in a hospital ever.
No, that's right.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. As I've said a few times in your story, like I connect with so much of it. Like it feels a little bit like you're telling my story. So that's like so funny to hear like the similarities that like occurred. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, also how empowering birth stories are and the impact that they can have.
Yeah, it really is, because like in different birth stories as well, you can see like, because, you know, it's not always perfect. There are things that come up sometimes, but then you read what they did in that scenario and you're like, I never would have thought of that. That is amazing. Noting that down, you know. Yeah. Instead of, you know, feeling afraid that might happen, you feel more knowledgeable, you feel more confident because you know what to do in that situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even what you said about, you know, the placenta and like how you feel that, you know, you weren't given the opportunity to get up and walk around and like actually try to, you know, make that whole process happen. Like I've never thought of that. I just thought they didn't give me enough time, but I never, even with Frankie, I was like, oh, I'll wait like at least an hour. Like I've read so much, it can take hours. I feel comfortable to wait an hour. But I never thought about, you know, the way that I would approach that if it didn't happen, you know, like if I would get up and move around and like yeah, I can't believe I never thought about that.
Yep. Get up, walk around. Initiating breastfeeding helps to trigger it as well. And also something as simple as sniffing the top of their head. That amazing newborn smell right on the top of their head. That sends signals to the brain saying, yeah, the baby is out. You can let that placenta go now.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we are just animals. So
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Did you have anything else to add?
Actually, there was one more thing.
Yeah.
Birth affirmations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The whole time, all through my pregnancy, I was like, I got to do the birth affirmations. I got to write them up. I got to stick them up around the place, you know, everything like that. But I wasn't drawn to doing it. I didn't, you know, I did sit down at one point to try and do it, and I blanked. I couldn't think of anything to put down. I didn't feel like you know, what I was writing or even copying and pasting others, it didn't resonate. Yeah. And then it got to the point, it was like a week before I gave birth. I was like, you know what? I'm not feeling that I need the birthing affirmations because I have no fears. I already know that I can do this. I don't need reminders that I can do this. even with Willow, when I was in labor with her, and even though it went for so long, not a single time did I think that I couldn't birth her.
Yeah.
And not a single time did painkillers ever cross my mind.
Yeah.
So I thought, I didn't have any issues the first time with my mentality. So I didn't think I needed affirmations this time. And I didn't, I went through the labor, and, I was focusing on myself. I had my eyes closed most of the time. I wouldn't even have been able to see them on the wall.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah, so I just didn't do them, and I didn't need them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'd also never thought about that. Like, if you have no fears about it, then you don't need to be if you're so confident in yourself, you don't need to be reminded to be confident in yourself. That's
right.
That's such a good point.
I had my biggest support, which was my husband. Like, he was there the whole time. He was, doing the massages on me. He was making sure I was staying hydrated. He was making sure that Willow knew what was going on. He was my voice through that whole thing.
Yeah.
And that is what I needed the most.
Yeah.
And he knew that, and he delivered, and it was just, he was amazing.
Amazing. How far he had come from all of that, all of that doubt.
And I think there needs to be a bit more support around partners during birth.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they can feel a bit helpless, which he did with Willow's birth.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to do anything. And so I guess from that experience, he, didn't want to do that again. He didn't want to have that helpless feeling. So we did a lot of preparation. I told him all the things that I'd love for him to do while I was in labor. And he knew what to do.
Yeah.
He had his job, and he did it so perfectly. And so he felt a lot more involved in the birth this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's probably quite healing for him as well.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go Pat. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your story and doing so relatively early on a Sunday morning as well.
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear what other people, how other people feel about hearing this story, because, man, I feel on a high. I can start my day on a high. That's very cool.
Yes, me too. I love reliving it. I think about it at least, 7 times a week.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, now you can listen to it 7 times a week as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. Bye.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to Michaela's amazing free birth story. I have many more episodes to come, so don't forget to follow along by clicking follow on whatever podcast host you're listening to this on, or by following the Instagram, where you can also message me to share your birth at home story on the podcast. And finally, as always, I've left some show notes in the episode description, so please check them out. Stay tuned for episode 5.